this is a message that's coming from me or coming to people that I care about. And so he talks about how we really need some momentum. This is the history, this is what's happening. We need people to come out and say that they care about this, that it's important. Please don't demolish these bridges. And he puts out the call to action saying that people really need to step up, make calls, show their support, because if they don't, the city's going to demolish this bridge and it's going to be a lost opportunity. And what a shame would that be. So what happens from that is that we start to see a lot of public support. And I know this is small, but basically this is just the comment page from that one article. And what these people start to say is, man, I don't even live in New Orleans, I live in Metairie, but I care about this and I put my tax dollars towards this. Then somebody else writes in and says, this is crazy, why aren't we doing it? The North Shore's doing it. Other people write in and say, okay, what can we do? Like, should I write a petition? Should someone write a petition? Then other people start writing in and saying, okay, if you write the petition, I'll sign the petition. So you can see how this article just started some conversation online, as well as people started making phone calls and saying, actually, this is important, we care about this, please, let's think before we react harshly and miss a huge opportunity. So, I'm delighted to say that that's exactly what happened. And this is the most recent state of this story is that the city has asked the state to halt the demolition of these bridges and to really consider the city's proposal to convert the South Shore end of this as a fishing pier, just like what's being done in St. Tammany. So, okay, we don't have the money to make the 5-mile linear bridge over water, but we can do what St. Tammany is doing and create a fun recreational facility for people and an opportunity for them to fish. And what's interesting, what we were talking about with this whole idea of media advocacy, is that politicians listen to what's in the media and they listen to what their constituents are saying and they care about it. It's important to them, that's how they get elected. So this particular advocacy effort got the attention of Councilman Johnson and Deputy Mayor Grant, who are now working together on a proposal to make this happen. So pretty good example and a pretty recent example of how people have used this idea of agenda setting to really make something happen. The second example that I'd like to go over with you all is the New York City food stamp debate. And so, how many of you all are familiar with that controversy? Probably most of you, okay. And our wonderful Tom Farley, who's now the New York City Health Commissioner, used to be the director of the Tulane Prevention Research Center, as you can imagine, is sort of leading this charge with the New York State Health Commissioner. So, what happens is that Mayor Bloomberg decides that they are going to issue a request to the United States Department of Agriculture that they want to bar New York City food stamp recipients from using food stamps to buy soda or sugar-sweetened beverages. So you can imagine a pretty contentious idea, but from the public health side, you could see where maybe you can understand their idea for why they think that this is an important policy proposal. So you have a copy of this article, and this was one of the first to come out. It's in the New York Times. It was published on October 6th, and it basically outlines this plan. And it very quickly gets to the point and says that 1.7 million people receive food stamps in New York City, and that's potentially who would be affected by this. Then they say that there are all these other provisions in the food stamp policy. People can't buy beer or alcohol or cigarettes or prepare hot foods with food stamps. So for that matter, why should they be able to buy soda or sugary beverages that don't really provide them with any nutritional value? So that was the argument from New York City's point of view, from their leadership. But they start to present early on all the different controversies related to this, and you can imagine what some other people had to say about that. Are we targeting certain people? Is this unfair? Is it the role or the right of the government to tell people what they can and can't buy with food stamps? So sort of an interesting issue. So from that, the very next day, Tom Farley and Richard Daines, who's the head of the New York State Health Department, writes an op-ed in the New York Times, and that ran on October 7th, And again, they sort of explain the existing restrictions to the food stamp program. They talk about the flaws. They talk about the prevalence and the cost of obesity, which is really high across the country and definitely high in New York City. And they say that, look, we've made a lot of strides in New York City. We're considered to be world leaders in public health. But New Yorkers, where we are losing out is in obesity and diabetes. We're not making the progress that we want to make in these areas. And we think that this radical policy is the way to do it. And they say, look, let us do it for 2 years. We'll rigorously evaluate it. We'll see what happens. And, then you can decide whether this is fair or not. And they make clear to say that, look, we're not taking money away from people. As a matter of fact, they should then have more money to spend on healthy foods for their family. So they make that as a very clear point. That's a distinction in the article. So those were both in October. Then recently, actually just on Monday, Esquire magazine ran a story in which they lay out Mayor Bloomberg, again, kind of telling his story, why he thinks this is important. We're still waiting to hear back from the USDA on what's going to happen with this. But he says, look, one sugary beverage a day is going to increase children's risk of developing obesity by 60%, which is a lot. And then he says, in New York City, we've got 50% of adults and 40% of kids are overweight. So this is a big problem. He then goes on to say that 6% of food stamps in New York City are spent on sugary drinks, and that amounts to between 75 and 135 million. And he actually says this is a big subsidy to the soda pop business. And why are we doing this? Why are we giving them our taxpayer dollars to make our people unhealthy? That's the argument. Then he goes on to say, I love this iconic photograph of him. It's all part of the, you're painting a picture, and that's what they're doing in this article. And he says, look, if New York does it and it's successful, the whole world is going to do it. And we can be the leaders in that. And imagine, being able to say that. That's a pretty exciting thing, and it's not that far of a stretch for him to say that. So that was sort of the most interesting, or the most recent, rather, article about this proposal.